guys, so today we're going to do part 2 of module 5. So part 1 was all about how do insects communicate, how do they talk to each other, how do they talk to us, and today is going to be all about insect sociality. What kind of social groups do they have, and then how did this sociality actually evolve? So I hope that you're excited because it's going to be super awesome and fun. We're going to be covering 3 major themes today, and you can go click on them right over there right now, but we're going to cover the types of sociality, how did eusociality specifically evolve, and then talk about the different caste systems that you would see in a eusocial colony of insects. So I'm going to start off talking about all the different kinds of sociality, and we're going to start off with truly solitary organisms and work our way up to completely social or eusocial organisms. And so let's get to it. Solitary insects are insects that do not interact with members of their species beyond competition and mating. And I would love to give you like a big defiant group of these organisms that, always are solitary, but it's not always the case. So if you have grasshoppers, for example, you have some that are obviously solitary, and you have some that are like the locusts that obviously are communal or display some sort of sociality. And then your wasps and your bees display everything from solitary all the way up to eusocial. So it's really hard to give you like a big group of organisms that just are all solitary all the time. But a couple good examples are the mud daubers, and these are the group of wasps that you'll probably notice around the mud huts that you'll see on lights and stuff, and that's those guys, and they make that nest, but they're solitary. They lay their eggs in there and then they leave. Dragonflies, for the most part, are pretty solitary as well. I mean, you'll see a whole bunch like living around a pond, but it's because like that's their habitat, and they're not necessarily interacting with each other more than, hey, you're in my way, or hey, I want to mate with you. The next group is subsocial, and subsocial insects pretty much don't care anything about the members of their own species except for their offspring, and so they provide parental care for their offspring, and there are varying degrees of this parental care. So all the way like at the bottom, the least parental care-ness that they could give would be like a parasitoid that's laying its egg inside something else. So yes, the parasitoid leaves after a while, but they're laying their egg in a good food source and basically laying its egg in protection. It'd be kind of like if you had all these instincts in your stuff, and your parents were just like, here's $1 million, make good choices. So it's parental care in the fact that they're like giving you a head start, but they're not like hanging around to actually take care of you. The next kind of step up from this would be like your water bugs or your wolf spiders that actually carry the eggs around on their back or on their abdomen until they actually hatch. And the belostomatids, or the giant water bugs, are really, really cool because the males carry around the eggs and not the female, so they're kind of like a seahorse. There's actually like a weird frog that does something really similar and has all like builds up this like skin tissue, and all of the young tadpole things like live in her back until they fully develop into frogs and then swim away. So kind of the same idea, a little bit more parental care, so that way the parent is putting themselves in a little bit more danger to ensure that their offspring are going to make it. And then on the extreme opposite side, you have something like the mole crickets that make a really nice nest, lay their eggs in it, and then the parents will guard the nest. And so they're going a bit further. They're kind of merging the other two ideas. They're ensuring a good spot for their offspring to develop, and they're actually sitting there and protecting them. The next subsection of sociality would be communal, or sometimes people throw around the term gregarious. And this just means that organisms will live together but not share brood care, or not share parental care, or there might not even be parental care. And a really good example of this is cockroaches. They'll live together, the females will lay eggs, and that's about the extent that they're helping the offspring. If you see like little cockroach nymphs in restaurants or in your apartment or an apartment that you're going to visit, it means that there's an overpopulation problem, especially if the nymphs are out during the day. or when all the lights are on. So that just means that their cockroach population is too high and that the little nymphs are finding somewhere else to go to start like a new kind of life because it's overcrowded where they are. So if you see this, don't eat at the restaurant or get traps for your apartment or don't live in that apartment. A really interesting study came out pretty recently that showed that female cockroaches will actually expedite their egg laying process and egg maturation process in the presence of other females, and they even will do it in the presence of other insects in general. So that was pretty interesting, and there's a link to that in the description, so make sure you check that out. Another example of communal insects would be your tent caterpillars. They're communal or gregarious in their larval state, but solitary in their adult state. And so in the spring, if you see those like silken tents in the treetops and stuff, and all those caterpillars are hanging around and on it, those are all the tent caterpillars, and they'll stay there until they're ready to pupate, in which case they'll start to wander away and then pupate and then turn into a butterfly. But that is an interesting example because a lot of things, especially Lepidoptera, are communal in their larval state, but not in their adult stage. The next type of sociality that we're going to talk about is quasi-social, and there's not like a super amazing long list of organisms that have this, and it's kind of like a halfway house between different other kinds of sociality. But basically, quasi-social is organisms or insects will share the same nest or brooding site and help each other with brooding care. And so a good example of this, and one of the few examples, are the orchid bees. And they'll make a nest, but not every bee will be able to lay her eggs due to availability of space, but they'll help each other raise the young. The next type of sociality is semisocial, and it's pretty similar to eusociality, but we're not quite there yet. So semisocial organisms are organisms that share the same brood or share the same nest, participate in cooperative brood care, and have a caste system. And a really great example of these are the paper wasps. Like, I'm hoping that everyone has seen a paper wasp nest. Anyway, so they'll help with nest construction. You have forager paper wasps. You have paper wasps that like sit on the colony and make sure things don't come over and try and destroy it. And so because you have this caste system and the cooperative brood care, these are considered to be semi-social. And here we are finally at eusociality or true sociality, and this is when organisms share the same nest, share brood care, have caste systems, and importantly have overlapping generations. And so the overlapping generations part is what separates the eusocial insects from like the semisocial, like the paper wasps. Eusocial insects make up a ton of the biomass on the planet. So there's some like crazy figures that are like if you took all the ants on the planet and stacked them all up and weighed them, all the ants would weigh more than the entire human population. So lots and lots of ants, lots and lots of eusocial insects. Some of the good examples of eusocial insects are obviously your wasps. Termites are eusocial, honeybees are eusocial, and then there are some kind of weird ones as well. Like there are eusocial gall aphids, and there are some eusocial thrips with Hymenoptera, and there's one mention of a eusocial weevil, and there's one mention of a eusocial wasp. A good mammalian example are the naked mole rats because they do have overlapping generations, they do have cooperative brood care, and they do have a queen that produces offspring for all of them. And so they are a truly eusocial mammalian group. The meerkats come pretty close. Like they have a caste system. They have certain members that are supposed to like take care of the offspring. They have certain members that are supposed to guard the colony or the nest. But they can all reproduce offspring. They don't have like a queen meerkat that just like reproduces the whole time. Although with meerkats it's really interesting because there's this really kind of amazing behavior where older meerkats will teach the younger meerkats how to like disarm scorpions so they can eat them because it's a really good protein source out in the desert. Humans are not eusocial, and that's for two major reasons. The first reason is because we are all fertile. Like we don't have one queen that's supposed to like populate the entire human race. Like we can all reproduce and that's pretty fantastic. The second reason is that we don't have cooperative brood care, and while like modern day society, we now have like daycare and can like pay someone to take care of our kid, it's because we have given them incentive to do it. It's not like they take care of our children out of the goodness of their hearts. So like if I had a friend and she got pregnant and had a child, the two of us would not spend equal amounts of time taking care of her child. It's her child, it's her and her significant other's responsibility. And even that kind of sentiment where, you know, you have a monogamous pair that both take care of the offspring all the time is kind of relatively new in human adaptations and human psychology. So if you think like, you know, caveman time, like all the women would like take care of their own kids and the guys would be out hunting, or even up till like the 50s, it was kind of like the woman would stay home and like cook and clean and take care of this baby while the husband went out and did work and stuff. So that's that idea that you can have two parents, stay-at-home dads or stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home whoever, and equal cooperation to take care of this child is a relatively new phenomenon that's happening because of human psychology and not necessarily because of like core instinct biology. And so we are not eusocial for those two reasons. We are all fertile and we don't take care of each other's kids out of the goodness of our hearts. Before we talk about what kin selection theory is and how it's the idea for how eusociality evolved, I want to talk a little bit about what a scientific theory is. Because if you go on the internet for like 2 seconds and you have some people that are like, oh, evolution's just a theory, and then you have the other people that are like, you don't really know what a scientific theory is, do you? Yes, evolution is just a theory, but so is gravity. So, what is a scientific theory? A scientific theory is an idea or a hypothesis that scientists over many different years and over many different backgrounds have come up with to explain multiple strains of evidence, data, models, and all this kind of evidence that could only really be connected and explained by one overarching idea. I have linked a really amazing video like right up there that really nicely explains what a theory is and does it in the context of evolution. And so you can see all the different backgrounds and all the different evidence we have to support evolution. We have evidence from microbiology, regular biology, casual observations, experiments, embryology, fossil evidence, geological evidence. Like we have a ton of evidence. And if you want to see all the different examples, you should click that video because it's really funny and it's really well done. So go do it. And now we're going to move on to kin selection theory. Eusociality as a biological concept confused a lot of scientists for quite a long time, and in fact, scientists are still arguing about how this behavior evolved. Eusociality even confused Darwin as he was writing An Origin of Species and talking about evolution. The idea of altruistic behavior just didn't make sense to him. And if you think about it, it doesn't really make that much sense because in evolution, you just want to pass your genes down. Anything that can help you mate more or survive longer to mate more is beneficial, and you want your genes, not someone else's, to get passed down instead. So, this kind of behavior where organisms are willing to sacrifice themselves for the survivability or longevity or mating potential of another just didn't really make sense to a bunch of scientists. The idea behind kin selection theory is that everyone is so closely related that whether or not you're fighting to get your genes to be passed down, or you're fighting to get your sister's genes to be passed down, or you're fighting to get your mom's genes passed down, it's all basically the same because you're so closely related. And so you get these sterile workers that are fighting for the greater good because they're all fighting to get the queen's genes to be passed down because the queen's genes are really similar to theirs, and so any offspring that she would produce would be pretty close to whatever you are, and so you don't need to reproduce, you just need to protect the one that is reproducing. Kin selection theory, though, has a couple major assumptions. Firstly, the whole model is based off of Hymenoptera, and if you remember, Hymenoptera have the haplodiploidy system, so males come from unfertilized eggs and females come from fertilized eggs. So that's one assumption. The other assumption is that the queen has only mated once, and the third idea or assumption is that there's no inbreeding happening. If I am a worker bee, so the one that goes out and forages and like works on nest construction and stuff, I am 50% related to my mom and 50% related to my dad because I'm female, and so I'm getting both of their genetics. I'm 3/4 related to my sisters because I'm getting the same genetics from my mom and from my dad, but you have to account for recombination and other genetic things so things don't pass down 100% all the time, and depending on what genes you get from whom, you're more or less related. But on average, you're about 75% related to all of your sisters. I am only 1/4 related to my brothers, though, because my brothers only get my mom's DNA, and I get both my mom and my dad's DNA. And so this kind of explains some behaviors like the males just kind of sit there and then don't do anything in the hive until it's time to mate. And if there are too many males and they aren't getting out fast enough, the females will starve out the males because they're kind of just wasted space, and they're also not too genetically related, so you don't really care too much if they make it. If I am a queen bee, I am 50% related to my son because even though he's not getting any sperm, I'm still giving him an unfertilized egg, and so it's not my full genome that he's getting, it's only like half of my genome that he's getting. I'm also 50% related to my daughters, and that's because, again, she's getting half of my genome and half of her father's genome, and so I'm only half related to her, too. This is where remembering the perspective of the bee is really, really important because, again, the genetics change depending on whose point of view you're looking from. So, if I'm a male bee, like the male that's in the hive waiting for my chance to go out and mate with some strapping young new queen, I am 100% related to my mom because while I only do have half of her genetics, the half that I have are 100% hers. And so I'm completely related to my mom. I'm not at all related to my dad because he didn't help make me. And I'm a half related to my sisters, and I'm half related to my brothers because they also have the genetics from the queen. And so we are equally related. If I am the male that mated with the queen, I'm dead. But for the sake of genetics, we'll talk about it anyway. So if I mated with the queen, I am not at all related to my sons because none of my sperm get to him, and I'm 100% related to my daughters because like the male contribution that they have in their genetics is entirely mine. Please remember that this is a really simplified model, and there's a lot of other complicated genetic things happening behind here that can actually influence this model, whether or not there's been inbreeding or if the queen has only mated once or not. This theory works really well for things like the eusocial gall aphids because aphids are parthenogenic, and so they've done away with males altogether. And so the females just reproduce identical clones of themselves, and so everyone has a really high degree of relatedness. And so if you have like the sterile soldiers that go out and sacrifice themselves for the greater good, it makes sense because their sisters are all really, really closely related, and their mom is just spitting out identical copies of herself. One of the assumptions of this model is that the queen has only mated once, which rarely happens. Usually she mates 2, 3, or maybe even 4 more times. And so if you're a worker bee, if your mom has only mated once, then yes, you're 75% related to your sisters, give or take, like all the time. If your mom has mated twice, then you're only 75% related to your sisters half the time. And then if your mom mates 3 times, then you're only 75% related to your sisters 1/3 of the time. And so as your mom mates more and more and more, the chances of you being super closely related to any one other given bee, it gets kind of small. And so one of the ideas is that the worker bees just can't actually tell if they're closely related to their sisters or not, and they just kind of assume that they are. But if you take pictures of honeybee colonies, you can see slight hue and slight color differences between all the worker bees because their genetics are coming from different male bees. Another place where the system breaks down a little bit is if you're a termite or a mammal and your genetics are that you don't have the haploid diploidy system. Every offspring comes from half male and the half the female, and they join together to make an egg, and then you have both your mom and your dad's genetics. And so you're only about half related to anyone at any given time. But in termites, for example, they have this really interesting behavior where they have one male and one female, and they mate for life, and the queen termite can live up to 45 years. And so that's pretty impressive. And also don't forget that there's inbreeding, so that changes the genetic makeup a tiny bit as well. So one of the big things that makes up eusociality is this idea of a caste system. And this is that different organisms of the hive have different jobs and different morphology based on what those jobs are. And usually, in most cases, there's like workers, although there can be different kinds, minor and major. There's usually some sort of soldier that goes out and defends the colony. You have your reproductive, your winged reproductives, and then you have your reproductive that stays and actually produces eggs for that colony. The biggest caste system are the workers, and they have age and size dependent jobs usually. And some of them, it's like you have to be a certain size and a certain age, and some of them you just have to be a certain age, and some of them are just you have to be a certain size. But just note that there are different jobs for the different workers of different ages and different sizes. Some of the jobs can include brood care, nest construction, foraging, tending to the queen, guarding the nest, and processing the food. And so, for example, honeybees, they all have like one kind of worker, but you have older workers and younger workers. And the younger workers tend to the queen, work on brood care, work on nest construction, and the older workers are the ones that you actually see out foraging and trying to find nectar and bringing pollen back and doing like little waggle dance and stuff. Ants tend to have major and minor workers, so depending on their size, they'll have different jobs. And one example is really cool is like the turtle ants. And so one of the morphologies is that the ant has like this weird like cup on the top of its head, and it like goes over and blocks holes in the stem that the ants have burrowed into as a kind of like living door. And so they have a really interesting morphology for that. How you get the different workers, if they're different sizes, is usually nutrition dependent. And so, depending on what the colony needs, they'll either feed the larva more or less, and so they'll get bigger or smaller. Sometimes there's like hormones or like food that can make different sized organisms, but people aren't really sure yet how that all works, and we haven't identified certain chemicals that do that yet. Soldiers are there to sacrifice themselves to protect the colony. And this is kind of where that kin selection theory people will start thinking about it. Like, why would you have these sterile workers go out and like blow themselves up so to save the rest of the colony? And that's when that relatedness comes in. But yeah, their basic job is to go out and defend the colony. Some termites they found a really interesting behavior where the older soldier termites will go out and actually blow themselves up. They have like this toxic chemical in them, like blow themselves up to save the younger termites in the colony. And so that's a really interesting example of altruism. And the soldier aphids, sometimes they're known as samurai, but the soldier aphids actually have a little bit of poison or venom in their mouth parts. And so they can actually use their mouth parts as a mechanism to hurt or destroy things that are coming and potentially going to damage the nest. These reproductives are the ones that are going to go out of the colony and mate and start a new colony. And they're usually sitting in the colony that they have and are just taking up space. And so if there's too many of them, oftentimes the females or the workers will starve them out. And that's a really good example in the honeybees. The females, if they have too many drones, will actually starve out the extra ones because they're a liability, they're taking up too much space, and they're wasting too many resources. Ants have a really interesting behavior where the winged reproductives are again taking up space or whatever, and so the workers will actually pick up the winged reproductive and carry it out of the nest and like dump it in the dirt away from the colony. And it's kind of like, hey, it's time to leave now. And so that's a really interesting behavior as well. Now we're on to the monarchy. So the queens is what you normally see in the bees and the ants. They don't have a male counterpart anymore. They got their male sperm and then had nothing more to do with them. And their job is just to reproduce and lay eggs for the rest of their life. Termites, on the other hand, while the queen's job is to like lay eggs for all 45 years that she's going to exist, the male also lives with her and continues to contribute sperm over her lifetime. I hope you guys liked part 2 of Module 5, and I hope that you guys liked learning about insect sociality and possible ways that it evolved. If you have any questions, especially about kin selection theory, because it's kind of confusing, you can leave me a comment, you can contact me via ELC, or you can email me. And so next Next week, we're going to start Module 6, which is all about how to do your insect collection. So hopefully that'll be useful and entertaining.